Rain hammered the night highway, lightning slicing the darkness as if the sky itself wanted to tear the earth apart. Jack Mercer never imagined his quiet drive home with his daughter would end with flames, twisted steel, and a stranger clinging to life in his arms. One moment, he was a single dad tired from another long shift at the mill. The next, he was pulling a bleeding man from a burning wreck, unaware that this stranger was no ordinary victim. He rode with the Hells Angels, and saving him would drag Jack into a world of roaring bikes, outlaw brotherhoods, and dangerous debts that demanded to be repaid. Follow this story until the very end, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. The rain came hard, drumming against the roof of Jack Mercer's beat-up Ford like 1,000 fists. Wipers squealed in protest, struggling to clear the windshield. The narrow highway twisted through black forest, its faded lines barely visible under the sheets of water. Jack leaned forward, squinting, jaw clenched tight. "Almost home, Emily," he muttered more to himself than to the girl asleep in the back seat. In the mirror, he saw her 10-year-old head resting against the window curls, damp with the breath that fogged the glass. Her favorite stuffed bear slipped from her lap to the seat beside her. Jack's chest tightened. She looked so small, so breakable. He thought of her mother the way Claire used to hum along to the radio during late-night drives. He swallowed the memory like a bitter pill. Tonight wasn't the night to drown in ghosts. He needed clear eyes. Then it happened. A sudden flash of fire bloomed on the road ahead, tearing him out of thought. His heart jumped. Jack's boot slammed the brake. Tires screeched the truck fishtailing before jerking to a halt on the shoulder. Emily stirred, blinking awake. "Daddy, what, stay here?" Jack's voice cut sharp through the storm. He yanked his jacket off the passenger seat, shoved open the door, and ran into the rain. The night smelled of burning rubber and gasoline. Flames licked up from a car crumpled against the guardrail, orange sparks flying into the downpour. Steam hissed, smoke curled black against lightning flashes. The world shrank to firewater and the pounding of Jack's heart. He sprinted closer. Through the shattered windshield, he saw movement, an arm twitching, a head rolling weakly against the headrest. Someone was alive. "Hold on," Jack shouted, voice raw in the storm. The driver's door was mangled metal folded in like tin. He grabbed the handle. It didn't budge. He yanked harder, bracing his boots in mud rain running down his neck. Pain tore through his arms, but the door stayed shut. Inside, the man's eyes flickered open, icy blue sharp, even through the haze of pain. He mouthed something, but the roar of the storm swallowed it. "Come on, damn it," Jack growled. He kicked at the frame. Once. Twice. Metal shrieked but shifted only an inch. Enough! He shoved his arm inside skin, scraping against jagged steel. Blood welled, but he ignored it. He gritted his teeth and leaned with all his weight. The door gave way with a scream. Jack reached in, hooking an arm under the man's shoulders. He pulled. The man cried out, blood soaking through his leather vest. Tattoos sprawled across his chest wings, a skull. Bold black ink that told stories Jack didn't understand, but instinct warned him not to ignore. "Stay with me," Jack grunted, hauling him free. The man's body was heavy, nearly dead weight, but adrenaline burned through Jack's veins. He dragged him back step after desperate step until the roar of the flames dulled. Behind them, the wreck exploded. Glass-shattered flames shot skyward, heat slapping Jack's back like a furnace door had swung open. Emily screamed from the truck, her voice piercing through thunder. Jack lowered the man into the wet grass. He was bleeding badly, his breath shallow and ragged. Jack pressed his hand against a gash across his ribs, trying to slow the flow. "Don't call cops?" the stranger rasped suddenly. His hand shot out, clutching Jack's wrist with surprising strength. Jack froze. "What?" "Promise me," the man choked out, blood bubbling at his lips. "No cops." Jack stared. Rain pounded against them both. Who was this man, bleeding broken, and yet so certain he couldn't be seen by law? Emily's small voice carried through the storm. "Daddy, is he okay?" Jack turned his head. She stood in the open truck door, trembling hair plastered to her face. His heart clenched. Back inside and... "M." Now he shouted. She hesitated, then obeyed, disappearing into the truck's shadow. Jack looked down again. The man's grip was loosening, his blue eyes fading, but the tattoos glared like warnings. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing closer. Someone else had already called it in. Jack cursed under his breath. Too late, brother. Help's on the way. The man's lips curved in a faint, dangerous smile before his head fell to the side unconscious. And in that moment, Jack Mercer's quiet life as a single father began to tilt into a storm he couldn't yet see. The sirens grew louder, flashing red and blue, slicing through the black curtain of night. Jack squinted into the storm, his jacket plastered to his skin, rain dripping from his chin. He could already see the glow bouncing off the wet asphalt, getting closer with every heartbeat. The stranger's chest rose and fell shallowly, each breath sounding like it was clawing its way out. Jack pressed harder against the wound. Warm blood mixed with the rain slick against his hands. "Damn it, stay with me," Jack muttered. His voice was rough, carried away by the wind, but maybe, just maybe, the man could hear it. Emily's small face peeked out from the truck again, fear wide in her eyes. Jack gave her a sharp shake of the head. She pulled the door shut quickly, but he knew she was still watching from the window. The cruiser skidded to a halt, headlights blazing. Two officers jumped out, one rushing toward the flames, the other toward Jack and the bleeding man. "Step back, sir," the officer shouted. Jack shook his head stubbornly. "He's bleeding out. I've got pressure on it. He won't last without an ambulance." The cop hesitated, glanced at the tattoos across the man's chest. His eyes narrowed. He muttered something into the radio clipped to his shoulder. Jack didn't like the look in his eyes. Two paramedics arrived, kneeling hard into the mud beside Jack. One slid an oxygen mask over the man's face, while the other cut open his vest to get better access. Jack's jaw tightened when he saw more ink sprawled across his arms, and rib symbols he didn't fully recognize but instinctively knew spelled trouble. The older paramedic met his eyes. "You pulled him out?" "Yeah," Jack nodded, breath ragged. "Saved his life," the man muttered, then barked orders to his partner. Jack wiped his bloodied hands against his jeans, chest heaving. He looked back toward the road, where the flames roared, higher smoke billowing against the rain. The wreck was beyond saving. An officer approached, his flashlight harsh in Jack's eyes. "Named Jack Mercer. You related to him?" He jerked his chin toward the stranger. "No. Just came across the crash." The cop's jaw tightened. "You didn't see anyone else?" "No bikes?" Jack frowned. "Bikes." The officer's eyes lingered on the tattoos again, his mouth a hard line. Jack realized then that whatever this man was tangled up in, the cops already knew, and they weren't looking at him like a victim, they were looking at him like cargo. The ambulance doors slammed shut. The sirens flared again as it tore away into the night. Jack stood there, rain dripping into his eyes, staring at the red taillights until they vanished into the dark. Emily's voice cut through, trembling but firm. "Daddy, can we go home now?" Jack turned. She was standing just outside the truck again, arms wrapped around herself. Lightning lit her face for an instant. She looked too old in that moment, too aware. He nodded, forcing calm into his voice. "Yeah, Em. Let's get you warm." He opened the passenger side door for her, making sure she climbed back in safely. Then he slid into the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel, knuckles pale in the flash of police lights still behind them. As he pulled away, he caught a glimpse of the cop's eyes in the mirror, watching him too long, too sharp, like he'd just tied himself to something that wasn't going to let go. The drive home was silent, save for the storm's fading growl. Emily finally spoke when they reached the familiar gravel crunch of their driveway. "Daddy." Who was that man? Jack shut the engine off, staring through the rain-smeared windshield. He wanted to tell her the truth that he didn't know, that maybe he didn't want to know. But he saw her eyes wide and searching. She deserved more than silence. "Someone who needed help," he said softly. Emily frowned, hugging her bear tight. "But he told you no cops." Why would he say that? Jack's throat tightened. He forced a smile he didn't feel. Sometimes scared people say strange things. Don't worry about it. But lying in bed later, listening to the rain drip from the eaves, Jack couldn't shake the feel of that man's grip on his wrist, the icy eyes, the smile faint and dangerous when sirens drew near. Jack thought he'd left the world of violence behind when Claire died. Thought all he had left was keeping Emily safe, working double shifts, keeping his head down. But tonight fate had shoved him right into the fire, and something in his gut told him that the stranger's story wasn't done with him yet. The morning broke gray and heavy clouds still thick from the storm. Jack sat at the kitchen table, a chipped coffee mug warming his hands. The smell of bacon drifted through the air, Emily's attempt at breakfast. She hummed softly as she balanced on a stool, watching the pan with a seriousness that made Jack's heart ache. "You don't have to cook, Em," he said gently, her small shoulders lifted. "You always cook for me." "I wanted to try." Jack smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. He sipped the coffee, but his thoughts weren't in that kitchen. They were back on the rain-soaked highway, on the stranger's blood staining his hands. The knock came hard, rattling the thin door. Jack froze. So did Emily. "Stay here," he whispered, rising. His boots scuffed the old linoleum as he moved to the door. He opened it just a crack. Two men stood there, leather jackets, soaked bikes idling in the drive behind them. The smell of oil and wet asphalt clung to them. Their eyes cold measuring landed on Jack. "You, Mercer," one asked. His voice was gravel, a low growl that carried the weight of threat without needing to raise. Jack's body tensed. He thought of Emily behind him clutching her bear. "Who's asking?" The taller man leaned forward, rain dripping from his beard. "Name's Snake. My brother's lying in a hospital bed 'cause of that wreck last night. Heard you pulled him out." Jack's grip tightened on the doorframe. The man's words weren't gratitude. They were accusation, sharpened and deliberate. "Yeah," Jack said finally. "He'd be dead if I hadn't." Snake's mouth twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "That's what we came to talk about." The second biker, broader and silent until now, shifted. His jacket bore a patch Jack recognized instantly. Hell's Angels. His stomach dropped. "You boys got the wrong idea," Jack muttered. "I don't want trouble." Snake's eyes glittered. "Trouble's already here. Our brother muttered a name before he passed out. "Jack Mercer. Said he owed you. Now when one of ours owes, it's everyone's business." Jack's throat felt dry. He wanted to slam the door shut, bolt it, keep Emily safe inside. But the thought of two bikers smashing their way in with her watching? No. He stepped outside instead, pulling the door tight behind him. The morning chills soaked through his shirt instantly. "What exactly do you want?" Jack asked. His voice was steady, though his heart hammered. Snake studied him, tilting his head like a predator sizing prey. "You ride?" Jack shook his head. "Not anymore." Snake chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Doesn't matter. You saved a brother. That makes you part of the ledger. We don't forget debts. We don't walk away from them either." Jack's mind flashed to Emily's face at the breakfast table, her humming tune, her small hands clumsy on the pan. He clenched his fists. "I didn't do it for favors. I just didn't want him to die." The silent biker finally spoke, his voice deep, calm, but edged like a blade. "Doesn't matter why. You're tied to us now." Jack's gut twisted. Every instinct screamed danger. He thought he'd left this world long ago, fists, violence, debts no honest man could pay. Yet here it was pounding on his door, leather-clad and merciless. Snake leaned closer, his breath reeking of smoke and rain. "You'll be hearing from us, Mercer. Make sure you're ready when we come back." With that, the two men turned. Engines roared, gravel spat under spinning tires, and then they were gone, swallowed by the misty road. Jack stood there, the sound echoing long after. His fists trembled at his sides. Behind the door, he heard Emily's soft voice. "Daddy." Who were they? He swallowed hard, forcing the fear down where she couldn't see it. He pushed the door open, smiling as best he could. "Nobody we need to worry about, sweetheart." But as he watched her flip another piece of bacon with clumsy hands, Jack knew it was a lie. Trouble had found them, and it had a name. Morning didn't so much rise as leak into the house through thin curtains, a slow wash of pale light that did nothing to warm the dread sitting heavy in Jack Mercer's chest. After Snake and the silent biker had left, the quiet had been all edges. Every creak, every passing car on the wet road made the hair on his arms lift. He moved through the kitchen on automatic eggs toast, packing Emily's lunch while the memory of leather jackets dripping rainwater onto his front step replayed in jagged loops. Emily padded in barefoot, her curls frizzed from sleep, hugging the bear by the middle, so its legs stuck out at odd angles. "Are we late?" she asked, peering at the clock like it might lie to her. "We're good," he said. "Eat a little, kiddo." She climbed onto the chair and kicked her heels while he slid scrambled eggs onto a plate. He wanted to keep the morning light, wanted to ask about her spelling test and the paper snowflakes she'd taped to the classroom window, but his mind kept snagging on Snake's voice. "You'll be hearing from us, Mercer." After drop-off, Emily's hand warm in his, her hug tighter than usual. Jack drove the long way to the shop. He kept checking his mirrors without meaning to, half expecting to see twin headlights hanging back at a steady distance. They didn't appear. The small town unspooled the way it always did the diner, with its neon coffee cup blinking anemically. The hardware store with a faded bait and tackle sign, it never took down the tire shop that smelled like burnt rubber even from the street. Normal. But the normal felt thin like paint flaking under a fingernail, and below it something darker waited. By 10, the garage had fallen into its usual rhythm compressor chuffing radio, low a 98 F-150 up on a lift with a stubborn brake line. Jack lost himself in the mechanics of it, grateful for anything that answered to torque and thread instead of threat and promise. He'd just cracked the bleeder valve when the office phone rang. Mercer Auto Pete called, then leaned out the doorway with a look Jack had never seen on his face. "It's for you." Jack wiped his hands on a rag, took the receiver. "Yeah, silence for a beat." Then a voice he didn't know, low and even. "Mercer. Who's this Iron Horse Diner? Noon. Back booth." The line clicked dead. The dial tone hummed in his ear like a flat line. He stared at the phone until Pete said, "You okay, man?" "Wrong number," Jack muttered. Setting the receiver down, but the lie tasted like copper. He thought about not going. He pictured Emily's face at pickup time, the way she couldn't help sprinting the last few steps into his arms. He pictured Snake on his front step again. The ledger. "When one of ours owes, it's everyone's business." At 11:30, he washed grease from his hands until the skin turned pink and raw. He told Pete he had an errand. He told himself this was about ending something before it grew too big to fit through his door. The Iron Horse sat at the far end of town where the road bent toward the river, a chrome-sided shoebox that had been there since the 70s, its neon sign buzzing in daylight. 2 motorcycles were angled close to the curb. Their chrome was so clean it mirrored the gray sky. Jack parked 2 spaces down, killed the engine, and sat with his hands on the wheel until his fingers stopped shaking. Inside, the bell over the door jingled. Heat wrapped him heavy with bacon fat and black coffee. A jukebox hummed with a song that sounded like it had never left the place. Regulars occupied the counter, their shoulders stiffening a fraction when they saw him look toward the back. A man sat alone in the corner booth, a bandage disappearing into his hairline eyes, the washed-out blue of a winter sky. He wasn't Snake, and he wasn't the silent brute from Jack's porch. He wore a black t-shirt under a leather vest that had been cut down to just the essentials. Everything about him said, weight removed on purpose. His presence made the booth feel smaller. He didn't stand when Jack approached. He didn't smile. He just said, "Mercer." Jack stopped, fingers curling unconsciously. "That your car I dragged you out of?" It was, the man said. His voice had a rasp in it, still either from smoke or a life spent breathing wind and gasoline. He nodded at the opposite bench. "Sit." Jack sat. The vinyl squeaked. He didn't like that his back faced the room, and the man's slight tilt of the head said he'd noted it. Then he shifted a fraction so Jack could see more. "Name's Lawson," the man said, after the waitress poured coffee and retreated without asking what they wanted, like this wasn't the kind of table you lingered at. "Most folks call me Hawk." There it was something solid to put with the face. The name felt familiar, the way names you've never heard can feel familiar when enough strangers have said them quietly enough for long enough. "You sent your friends to my house," Jack said. Hawk's mouth tugged into something that wasn't quite an apology. "Snake ain't anyone's definition of charming. But his brother is alive because of you." He tapped the table once with the tip of his finger knuckle scarred. "That carries weight." "I didn't do it for you," Jack said before he could smooth the words. "You did it because you're the kind of man who doesn't drive by when something's burning." Hawk didn't blink. "That make it less mine." The waitress deposited 2 mugs and a plate of toast in case they changed their minds about eating. Coffee steam curled up, cutting through the metallic edge of Jack's nerves. He took a swallow to have something to do with his hands. Hawk set a plain white card between them. No logo, no name. Just a number in black ink, heavy strokes like the writer didn't care if the pen bled through. "You need something you call this. Doesn't matter the hour." "I don't want anything," Jack said. "That's not how this goes." Hawk leaned back a fraction, winced like stitches tugged underneath his shirt. "You saved my life." "That puts you in the circle whether you like it or not. It's not a club. It's a chain. I've got a daughter," Jack said, because it felt important to get that into the air. "She's 10. She's everything." Hawk's eyes didn't soften, but something in them shifted recognition maybe, or respect, with its chin raised. "Then you understand the only thing that matters." He pushed the card an inch closer. "You don't have to wear a patch for men to stand on your porch when the wrong truck slows down." Jack looked at the number until it blurred. "Snake said there's a ledger." "There is," Hawk said, "but not the kind you think." He wrapped his fingers around his mug and didn't drink. "You think we're all one thing. Most folks do. Headlines love one kind of story. But the road is long. It makes men who've done bad things do good things to balance the books. Sometimes it's coats in winter. Sometimes it's groceries left where nobody can see who left them. Sometimes it's a stranger pulled through fire." He shrugged. "Sometimes it's a call that says, 'Don't go to work on Tuesday.'" The hairs on Jack's neck rose. "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact," Hawk said. He held Jack's eyes. "You want me to lie to you? Tell you that after last night nobody noticed your face, that you aren't in someone's mouth already when they talk about me?" He shook his head once. "You're on a hill, Mercer. Fire rolls downhill. We sandbag together or we watch your house get wet first." The diner door opened. The bell jangled like a nerve. 2 state troopers stepped in, rain beating on their hats. The room's volume dipped a notch. Hawk didn't look over. He pinched a triangle of toast and ate it like he'd never done anything else with his hands. Jack's pulse kicked. He forced himself to keep his shoulders level. One trooper tilted his chin imperceptibly toward the back, that almost salute men give to other men they don't plan to move on today. Hawk ignored it without offense, like the whole choreography had been performed 100 times. "Your man in the wreck told me not to call the cops," Jack said, because it sat on his tongue and tasted like iron. "Not because we think we float above them," Hawk said, "because there are things a uniform can't fix and things it makes worse." He pointed with his chin, not his hand, at the window. Outside, a man in a baseball cap was staring too long at the 2 parked Harleys, his jaw set to perform his wife tugging at his sleeve to stop. "Everybody's got a part to play. Ours is loud. Yours might not be. I'm a mechanic." Jack let the word sit there, solid and ordinary. "I fix things that don't scream back." Hawk's mouth did something like a smile and then didn't. "You fixed a man on the side of the road who did." Silence stretched. The jukebox shifted tracks. Silverware chimed in a bus tub. Rain ticked at the window like fingernails. Jack thought of Emily's breath-fogging glass in the back seat. He thought of his front steps slick with rain under Snake's boots. He thought of a promise he'd made to a dying woman that he'd keep their girl safe no matter what it took, even if what it took chewed him up. "What happens if I don't take the card?" he asked. Hawk didn't reach for it. "Then it'll still be in your pocket when you reach for change." "I'm not the one who put it there." He nodded once at Jack's chest. "You are." Jack almost laughed. It came out as a sound he didn't recognize. He slid the card toward himself and didn't look at it. He said, "If trouble comes to my door, we answer it first," Hawk said. "And if trouble comes because of you, then we move your door," Hawk said softly, like he'd said it before and meant it every time. "Long as you don't lie to me, long as you keep your hands where they belong, long as you remember the only truth that matters, which is that little girl who thinks you can turn rain off by flipping a switch." Jack pictured Emily's small fingers on the kitchen light last week, frowning when the storm kept going. He felt the floor of his chest drop out and then settle. Hawk slid from the booth with the careful economy of a hurt man conserving force. "Snake will run hot. Diesel runs slow. You'll like him better. Cutter keeps books with his eyes. If you see him staring, it's because something doesn't add up." "You just describing your friends to the man who saved your life?" Jack asked. "I'm describing the weather," Hawk said, "so you don't dress wrong." They stepped out into the bright cold day. The rain had stopped, leaving everything sharper. Steam lifted from the blacktop. Hawk paused beside his bike like the machine was a companion and not a thing. Jack stood there with the card sweating in his palm, feeling the town move around them. Someone's screen door slap a delivery truck. Beep. Gently as it backed into the alley, a crow complaining about nothing in particular. Hawk glanced at Jack's truck, 2 spaces down. That an oil leak or just pride? Both, Jack said. Hawk's laugh was a breath, nothing more. He swung a leg over the Harley and winced again. You did something that takes a piece out of a man, he said, without revving yet. That piece doesn't grow back. It makes room. For what Jack asked, for whatever you feed it. Hawk thumbed the starter. The engine came alive like a living throat. Call if you need. Don't if you don't. Either way, eyes up. The bikes pulled away in perfect stagger chrome, catching a ragged strip of sun. Jack watched them shrink to 2 commas on a long sentence of road, felt the heat of their passage remain an instant after they were gone. He slid into his truck and didn't start it. He pulled the card out and set it on the bench seat. The number stared back nothing and everything at once. He closed his eyes and saw Emily's face the way she always reached for his hand in parking lots, even when she pretended she didn't need to anymore. He picked up the card, put it in his wallet, and drove back to the garage. The rest of the day felt normal by force invoices and wrenches, Pete arguing with a supplier about a part that never arrived. But at 3, Jack looked up and saw a black SUV idling across the street too long. Its windows were dark enough to hold a man like a secret. It rolled away when he stepped outside. At 5, he stood in the elementary school pickup line with other parents. Emily ran at him full tilt, her backpack bouncing her grin, something bright he didn't deserve. He lifted her the way he had since she could walk, and for a second the ledger balanced. "Can we get milkshakes?" she asked, breathless. "Yeah," he said. "Let's get milkshakes." At the diner counter, Emily picked sprinkles and Jack watched their reflection in the chrome band of the pie case. Father and daughter swirled straw colors, a little world inside a bigger one. He paid in cash and tipped too much. On the way out, the trooper from that morning's diner shift held the door for them. He nodded like men nod when they know something about each other and pretend they don't. Jack nodded back. The sky had the color of a healing bruise. Night would come, and with it headlights that stayed too long at corners, names said too softly over phone lines, promises that felt like insurance and threat at once. But Emily's hand was in his. Her milkshake left a pink ring on the cardboard tray. The little bell above the door laughed them back onto the sidewalk. A card in his wallet pressed into his hip when he walked. A circle had drawn itself around his small life with chalk and gasoline. He could pretend he hadn't seen it, or he could step inside where the ground might be warmer. At the crosswalk, he squeezed Emily's fingers, and she squeezed back twice, one for "I'm here," one for "I know." He looked both ways, then led her across. The rest of the afternoon moved like a film strip, missing frames, jump cuts between small, ordinary moments that couldn't quite mask the hum under Jack Mercer's skin. He finished the F-150, signed 2 invoices, answered a call from the school nurse about a scraped knee, not Emily's, thank God, and pretended not to notice when the black SUV reappeared across the street for 5 long minutes before slipping away again like a shadow, deciding against it. At 5:30, he turned the garage lights off one by one, the bays falling into rectangles of dim gold. Outside, the early evening had turned the clouds into bruises. The air smelled like wet leaves and hot metal. He slid behind the wheel of the Ford, leaned his head back against the rest for a second, and let out a breath that sounded too loud in the cab. His phone buzzed. He didn't jump this time. He just looked at the screen at the unknown number, then answered because that's what the man from the diner had told him to do, whether he wanted to or not. Mercer came Hawk's voice. No hello, no pause. A line cut clean into the moment. Need a hand. Not trouble. Jack's mouth went dry anyway. Where Hawk gave an address on the industrial edge of town, the same long warehouse row where old furniture went to die and carpet stores pretended to be busy. Bring your truck, he added. You got a neighbor you trust to sit with your girl a couple hours. There was only one answer to that. Mrs. Lane Jack said. She'll come, Good Hawk said. We'll be there. The line went dead, but the echo stayed. At home, Emily was sprawled on the living room rug, working math problems. her pink pencil chewing through the paper as if the numbers could be wrestled into good behavior. The bear sat propped beside her like an overly patient tutor. She looked up when he came in face, doing that immediate brightening thing that always left a crack in his chest. "Milkshakes were awesome," she announced, as if it had been years, not 2 hours. "Glad to hear it," Jack said, pulling off his boots. "I need to run out again for a bit. Mrs. Lane's coming over. How about you two start a movie?" Her expression shifted a tiny flare of worry that tried to hide behind casual. "It's not those men again, is it?" He crouched, met her eyes. "It's just helping somebody. Nothing scary, but I want you here with her." "Okay." She nodded, swallowing that small fear down because he asked. 10 years old and already practicing the trick. Mrs. Lane arrived with a casserole like she couldn't set foot in a neighbor's house without feeding it. "You'll be back before the second act," she said, waving her hand as if time obeyed her. "Go on." He kissed the top of Emily's head, breathed in the shampoo that smelled like apples, and walked out before he could decide to stay instead. The Ford rumbled through a town that knew how to keep its face composed. A dog barked like it had information. A porch light clicked on as he passed. Somewhere a screen door said, "Thwack to the night." The warehouse district looked the way it always did, long, silent rectangles of corrugated metal with their names stenciled in black. But one unit had its roll-up door open, and a pool of white light spilled onto the wet concrete like a stage. Inside, figures moved, men lifting men, carrying men, stacking, no music, no shouting, just the rhythm of work. Hawk stepped into the doorway when Jack pulled up as if he'd been listening for the exact timbre of that old Ford. He wore the same cut-down vest, the same even gaze. The bandage at his hairline had darkened to the color of old paper. "You came," he said. Again, not a question. "You asked," Jack said, and tried not to hear the other sentence that had followed him since the diner. "And I said I would," Good Hawk said. He hooked his chin toward the interior. "We're moving weight." Jack braced for crates he didn't want to see. Inside he saw coats, piles of them. Children's bright puffers, adult parkas, a rainbow of hats that had probably come from church drives, and school bins. Next to them, cases of canned food stacked high as his shoulder boxes marked with shaky Sharpie beans, corn fruit cocktail, and another pallet of fleece blankets still wrapped in plastic. Diesel appeared from between stacks, carrying 2 boxes like they were empty. He nodded once. "You the mechanic." "Sometimes," Jack said. Good Diesel said. "You know about leverage. Use your legs, not your back. Stack even no hero stuff." Snake was there too, moving with an irritability that looked native to his bones. He lifted a box, glanced at Jack, then looked away like recognizing a debt in public might be a breach of etiquette. "Community Center lost their funding," Hawk said, answering the question Jack hadn't asked. "Bunch of families got squeezed. We fill the gap when the gap ignores the children in it." He said it without softness. The rage was under the floorboards, not on the table. "Where's it going?" Jack asked, rolling the sleeves of his flannel to his elbows. "Back of Beyond Diesel," said, jerking his head. "Trailer court by the old drive-in. The apartment's behind the feed store. Mrs. Kaminsky's place. You'll know it when you see the wind chimes. 2 shelters on the far side of the river. You'll ride point with me." He pointed to Jack's truck. "That bed's gonna earn its keep." It did. For the next 3 hours, the world became a loop warehouse light cardboard scrape the flex and give of weight in his hands, the thump of boxes onto truck beds, tailgates lifting, straps ratcheting tight engines, starting engines, cutting boots on concrete breath, making ghosts in the cooler air. No one talked about cops. No one said a word about patches. The language here was grunt and nod and hear and go. Every so often, Jack caught Hawk watching, measuring not for weakness but for engagement. Was the man stepping in on the next lift without being told? Did he see the wobble in the stack and slide a hand to steady it without turning it into a scene? Was he learning the rhythm strangers move to when they decide to be something else? He was. He hadn't realized how badly he wanted a rhythm that wasn't just survival. They pulled out in a loose convoy. Jack's Ford Diesel's battered bed, a van, whose back windows were painted so kids wouldn't see the surprise too early. The first stop was the trailer court. Porches sagged under the weight of years. The kind of wind chimes that come from dollar bins made thin sounds in the night. A woman in a robe opened her door when the engines cut. She had the face of someone who'd learned not to expect good news after 9 p.m. We didn't order anything. She began pulling the robe tighter across herself. You did? Diesel said gently, not smiling because this wasn't that moment. He handed her 2 coats in child sizes and a third for her. You just didn't know you did. Her eyes filled so fast it embarrassed her. She kept talking to cover it. I had a plan. She looked down at the bright coats like they'd fallen from a cleaner sky. Thank you. Jack carried a box of canned goods up her steps. Inside, he saw a couch patched with duct tape and a coloring book open to a half-finished page. On the counter, a calendar with 3 dates circled and nothing written on any of them. Just circles like someone rehearsing. Back at the truck, Snake lifted a case toward a door with 3 locks. An old man answered, veteran hat, cocked jaw, stubborn. We don't need charity, he said, voice gone rusty with pride. It's not charity, Snake said bluntly. It's groceries. The man stared at him for a long time like they were in a standoff. Only he could see, then stepped aside. When he set the box on the table, Snake's eyes flicked to a framed photo of a boy in a uniform, then away, as if whatever he registered got filed somewhere under better not to open tonight. 2 apartments behind the feed store took blankets, one for a teen mom with a baby that made the small sounds of an always hungry infant, one for an old woman whose heater clicked but didn't ignite. Jack knelt beside the heater without announcing why and coaxed it to life with a practiced tenderness that made the old woman put a hand over her mouth. You men, she said, not meaning just him. You men are trouble. Then she patted his shoulder and sent them with cookies that tasted like cinnamon and a little too much salt. At Mrs. Kaminsky's place, wind chimes of every size and type filled the small porch, clinking a jittery music. She opened the door, still in her church dress, like she'd fallen asleep in it. Come in, she said, as if they were already family. You boys look thin, she added, a lie offered as hospitality. They didn't go in. They stacked quietly instead. Hawk stayed by the gate, keeping an eye on the street the way wolves watch the edge of the tree line. When a sedan slowed, his head tilted and it kept going. On the far side of the river, outside a squat building whose hand-painted sign read, Hands and Hearts, a volunteer with purple hair cried openly when Diesel lowered 3 crates of canned soup into her arms. We thought we were going to have to turn people away tomorrow, she said, voice breaking. You have no idea what this means. She looked at the jackets at Jack and his flannel damp with sweat. Maybe you do. On the 3rd run, Jack realized he wasn't noticing the ache in his back anymore. He was noticing the way people said thank you without saying it, and the way a small hand appeared from behind a woman's leg to touch the sleeve of a puffer coat like it might float away. He was noticing that Hawk never took credit and never moved first toward a doorway without looking to see if someone else should. He was noticing something in himself soften and harden, at once soften toward the world, harden around his daughter like a ring. On the final load, Diesel tossed him a bottle of water. You move like a man who's carried the heavy end before, he said. Long time, Jack said, twisting the cap. Some days you forget, some days you remember. Tonight's a remember, Diesel said. Snake walked by, box on his shoulder, and muttered, Don't break your back proving something that ain't on trial. The closest thing to kindness Jack figured he'd get from him, and it was enough. They returned to the warehouse close to midnight. The place looked oddly vulnerable, now stripped of stacks like a stage after a show. Hawk stood in the emptiness, as if measuring whether it had done what it was supposed to do. You keep your girl safe tonight, he asked without turning. Mrs. Lane, Jack said. She makes casseroles when she's nervous. Smart woman, Hawk said. He faced Jack. This isn't your debt. Don't make it one. You showed up because you're the kind of man who shows up. If you start thinking you owe me for letting you be yourself, you'll put a chain around your own neck and call it mine. Jack didn't expect philosophy he needed at midnight from a man who carried a ledger in his eyes, but there it was. He nodded once because he couldn't find the right shape for thank you. Hawk's gaze moved past him to the dark outside. You'll see cars you don't recognize this week. You'll think about the card. Half the time you'll be right to think about it. The other half it'll just be a man looking for a left turn he keeps missing. Don't live with your hand on the phone, Mercer. Live with your hand on your girl's shoulder. Jack felt something in him stand up a little taller and sit down a little calmer at the same time. I can do that, he said. Goodhawk answered like they'd signed something he couldn't read but already meant. Back home, Mrs. Lane had fallen asleep sitting up on the couch, a blanket over her knees, the TV whispering a late-night commercial about knives that could cut pennies. Emily was curled on the love seat, the bear tucked under her chin, the blue light making her look like a secret. Jack woke Mrs. Lane gently, pressed the casserole back into her hands, and thanked her until she shooed him out of gratitude. He lifted Emily, and her arms went around his neck on reflex the way they had since she was small enough to fit entirely on his forearm. He carried her to bed, tucked the covers in, and stood watching the rise and fall of her breath until his eyes stung. In the kitchen, he washed his hands and watched the water go pink at first, then clear. He leaned on the counter and stared at nothing, which turned out to be everything the space the circle made around him, the way his house looked from the street. When a black SUV slid by, the feeling in his muscles that wasn't the old exhaustion, but a new one that promised sleep would be earned in a way that felt clean. He took his wallet out, thumbed the edge of the card, then put it back where it lived without looking at it. He didn't need to. He knew the number by the weight of it. In the quiet, he heard a motorcycle a few streets over, not stopping, just passing by on its way to somewhere else. The sound faded. The house settled. The rain finally gave up. Jack turned off the kitchen light and whispered into the dark, like a man telling a story to the room that had started to believe it with him. "We're okay." It wasn't a promise. It was a job description. The next morning broke gray and restless, the kind of dawn where the sky seemed to sag under its own weight. A thin mist clung to the cracked roads, and the smell of burned rubber still lingered faintly along the stretch where Jack had pulled Michael from the wreck. Jack hadn't slept much. His little house had creaked with the night wind, and Emily had crawled into his bed around 2 a.m, whispering that she dreamed of fire. Jack rubbed his face in the dim light, staring at the ceiling, feeling both gratitude and unease. Saving a man's life wasn't new to him. He'd been a firefighter once, long ago, before his wife's illness forced him to trade shift work for odd jobs closer to home. But there was something different about Michael. Something coiled behind the man's bruised eyes when he regained consciousness. By breakfast, the silence felt heavy. Emily, ever observant, pushed her cereal around with her spoon and finally asked Daddy, "Is the man you saved okay?" Jack gave her a soft smile, though his jaw tightened. "He's alive. That's what matters most. But you're worried." He reached over, brushed her hair from her face. Sometimes grown-ups stay worried even when things turn out all right. He didn't explain further. How could he tell her that the stranger's tattoos ink of snarling skulls and winged wheels whispered of the Hells Angels? At mid-morning, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. Jack Walker. The voice was gravelly heavy with cigarettes and miles. "Yes. Who's asking?" "You don't know me, but you pulled my brother out of the fire last night." "Michael. He told us." Jack's heart kicked hard. He glanced at Emily drawing at the table, the soft scratch of her crayons grounding him. "How's he doing? He's breathing because of you. That's something." The caller paused. "We'd like to see you. Show our thanks." "I don't need thanks," Jack said quickly. "Just hope he gets better." But the man chuckled low, like iron chains rattling. "See, that's the thing. In our world, debts aren't left unpaid. You'll hear from us." The line went dead. Jack lowered the phone, the kitchen suddenly feeling smaller, like the walls had drawn closer. He closed his eyes and exhaled. The last thing he needed was bikers sniffing around his quiet life near his daughter. That evening, after Emily fell asleep curled around her stuffed rabbit, Jack sat on the porch steps staring at the empty street. The hum of a motorcycle broke the silence. A single headlight cut through the mist and rolled to a stop across from his house. A man dismounted. Tall, broad, a leather cut draped over his shoulders. The patch on the back was unmistakable, a skull with wings, Hell's Angels stitched bold above it. The biker didn't move closer. He just lit a cigarette, the ember glowing in the dark, and watched Jack like he was reading every thought in his head. Finally, he spoke across the quiet street. "You got guts, Walker. Pulling a man out of fire like that?" Jack stood slowly, fists clenching at his sides. He was dying. Anybody would have done it. The biker shook his head, exhaling smoke that drifted in ghostly swirls. "No." Most would have stood back, watched him burn, The words cut because Jack knew they were true. He had seen enough accidents in his life to know courage wasn't common. "What do you want?" Jack asked, keeping his voice steady. "Michael says you didn't flinch. Says you dragged him out even when the flames licked your arms." The biker took one step forward, his boots crunching gravel. "In our world, that kind of loyalty, hell, it means everything. I'm not part of your world." "Maybe not, but the world has a way of claiming men like you." Jack's chest tightened. Emily stirred inside a soft rustle against the window screen. He lowered his voice. "I have a daughter. I want no part in your business." The biker dropped his cigarette, grinding it under his heel. "We don't forget debts, Walker. One way or another, this isn't over." He swung back onto his bike, the engine roaring to life. Then he was gone, swallowed by the mist, leaving only the faint smell of gasoline and smoke. Jack sat back down heavily, head in his hands. He'd saved a life, but in doing so, he might have opened the door to trouble he could never close, and he knew deep in his gut that trouble was already on its way. The following day, Jack tried to bury himself in routine, fixing the loose hinge on the kitchen cabinet, patching the squeaky step on the porch, cooking pancakes the way Emily liked them. But even as syrup dripped golden over her plate and the morning sun painted the small dining room in pale light, he couldn't shake the memory of that biker standing across the street, a silent sentinel with a patch that carried more weight than most men could imagine. Emily, perceptive as always, noticed his distracted gaze. "Daddy?" she asked softly. "Is something wrong?" Jack forced a smile. "No, baby, just tired." She tilted her head unconvinced, but went back to eating, humming quietly to herself. Jack envied her innocence, the way she could believe the world was safe, as long as he was there to guard it. He prayed he could keep that promise. By mid-afternoon, a knock rattled the front door. Jack's stomach clenched. He peered through the curtain. Not one man this time, three. All clad in worn leather, their cuts bearing the unmistakable red and white insignia of the Hells Angels. Their bikes sat idle at the curb chrome, catching the sun like flashes of steel. Emily peeked from the hallway. "Who is it?" Jack's voice was calm, too calm. "Stay in your room, sweetheart. I'll handle it." She hesitated, then retreated, leaving him alone to face the storm. Jack opened the door slowly. The leader stepped forward, a mountain of a man with arms corded in tattoos. His beard was streaked with gray eyes, hard but not unkind. He stuck out a gloved hand. "Name's Bear, Michael's brother." Jack didn't take the hand. "What do you want?" Bear lowered his arm, nodding slightly as though he respected the caution. "To talk. Nothing more. You saved my brother's life. That means you've earned our attention." "Attention's the last thing I need," Jack replied evenly. One of the others, a wiry man with sharp eyes, chuckled. "Most folks beg for it. You push it away." "Interesting." Bear cut him a look that silenced him, then turned back to Jack. "Look, I won't waste your time. In our world, a life saved is a bond made. You don't walk away from that." Jack crossed his arms, feeling the weight of their presence pressing against his small porch. "I didn't save him for a bond. I saved him because it was right." Bear studied him for a long moment. Then, to Jack's surprise, he smiled faintly. "That's exactly why we're here." Jack frowned. "I don't follow." Bear leaned closer, his voice dropping. "You're a man who acts without hesitation. Fire danger, no thought of yourself. Men like you are rare. And when we find them, we don't let them drift back into the shadows. I'm not interested. You say that now. But trouble finds good men, Walker. Always does. When it does, you'll need someone at your back. That's what we're offering." The words left a chill in Jack's chest. He thought of Emily asleep, of the quiet life he had built with shaky hands after so much loss. The last thing he wanted was the shadow of the Hells Angels darkening their days. "You show up at my door again," Jack said tightly. "And I call the cops." The wiry one laughed outright. "You think cops scare us?" But Bear raised a hand. "Easy. He's protecting his own. I respect that." Bear turned to leave the others following, boots thudding heavy against the porch steps. Before he mounted his bike, he looked back once more. "We don't forget Jack. You may not want us, but that doesn't change the fact that you're part of our story now. Remember that." Engines thundered to life, shaking the quiet street. Emily crept from the hallway, eyes wide with fear. Daddy, who were they? Jack knelt, pulling her close, the roar of motorcycles fading into the distance. No one we need to worry about, baby, I promise. But as he held her, Jack knew the truth. Promises were fragile things, and the sound of those engines would haunt him, a reminder that the life he had saved had bound him to a world he could never fully escape. That night, long after Emily had drifted to sleep, Jack sat alone on the porch with an old bottle of whiskey he hadn't touched in years. He stared at the dark street, the echo of engines still alive in his memory. He whispered into the silence as if confessing to the night itself. God help me. What have I gotten us into? The wind carried no answer, only the faint smell of gasoline lingering like a warning. Dawn came thin and colorless, a cold rinse that didn't quite wash last night out of Jack's bones. The whiskey still sat on the porch rail where he'd left it, half an inch of amber catching a sickly light. He capped it, slid it back into the cabinet above the sink, and stood, a breath too long with the door open as if he could shut more than a bottle with that small motion. Emily padded into the kitchen in a flannel nightgown, hair an unruly halo. You're up early, she yawned, rubbing one eye with the back of her hand. So are you, he said, putting water on for oatmeal. Bad dream. She nodded, but didn't explain. She rarely did when the dreams had fire in them. He kissed the crown of her head and said nothing because sometimes the only way to keep a promise was not to make one. On the drive to school, he took the long way, a habit that had nothing to do with scenery and everything to do with watching his mirrors. A white work van slid in behind them for 2 blocks, then turned into the lumberyard. A black SUV idled at the corner store and did not pull out. The world had taken on a new edge, like all the lines were drawn with a sharper pencil. Pick you up at 3, he said at the curb. Emily squeezed his hand twice, one for I'm here, one for I know. Then ran toward the doors, backpack bouncing. At the garage, the air smelled like hot rubber and old coffee. Pete had already thrown the bay doors open. Pale light lay in long stripes across concrete. Morning, Pete said around a donut. You look like you wrestled a carburetor and lost. Something like that. Jack tugged on his coveralls and slid under a Pontiac with a leaky pan gasket. He let the work take him the holy relief of parts that did what they were designed to do if you just turned the wrench the right way. The mindless rhythm grounded him the way a heartbeat does when you finally stop listening for what's wrong with it. Near 10, the bell over the office door dinged. A man in an insurance company button-down stepped in, briefcase in hand, smile like a receipt. He asked about fleet service and Jack nodded along, wrote down numbers, made noises that sounded like interest. The man left a card. It had weight without meaning. At 11:30, Trouble arrived late for its appointment. The office door slammed. A heavy-set guy with sunburned forearms marched in, waving an invoice, red-faced and loud. You charged me for rotors and you didn't change them, he barked. His breath smelled like old coffee and fresh anger. My cousin knows cars. Says you're running a scam. Pete shot Jack a look. Want me to handle it? Jack shook his head and wiped grease from his hands, walking out with the deliberate calm of a man approaching a skittish horse. Let's take a look, Jack said, keeping his tone even. If we made a mistake, we'll fix it. Mistake my ass. The man jabbed a finger into Jack's chest. You think I'm stupid? Jack resisted the reflex to step back. I think you're mad. And I think your truck is right out there, and I think we can put it on the lift and talk less and see more. The man's mouth twisted. Don't tell me what to do in my town. This is my town too, Jack said, and that was maybe the wrong truth to say aloud because the man's eyes flared. He shoved Jack not hard, but enough to make Pete stiffen behind the counter. Jack caught himself on the edge of the desk, breath steady. He kept his hands down. He thought of Emily in a classroom drawing a bear with a purple crayon. He thought of the note he'd left himself on the fridge years earlier. Never swing first. Your hands are for holding her up. He swallowed. I'm going to roll your truck in, Jack said. You can watch, you can film it, but you can't put your hands on me again. Deal. The man puffed like a bull and opened his mouth to say the next stupid thing. The bell over the door dinged again. 2 shadows fell into the room and stood there as if the floor had been waiting for them. Diesel, jackhammer forearms, quiet eyes took in the room in one sweep. Beside him, Reed Lawson Hawk wore his injury like a shrug, a pale scar cut through his hairline, the rest of him uncuttable. They did not posture. They simply existed, which was somehow louder. The customer's bluster hiccuped. He glanced at their jackets, at the red and white, at the way the room had shifted around them. Problem Diesel asked conversationally, as if he were commenting on weather. His voice had gravel and a slope to it that suggested there was an easier way down the hill if you chose it now. No problem, the man said too quickly. Color rose in his neck. Just a misunderstanding. Those happen, Hawk said. He stepped to the side, clearing Jack's line to the door. Good to sort them civil. The customer swallowed. Yeah. He set the invoice on the counter like it might explode. I'll, come back tomorrow. We'll be here, Jack said. The man left. The bell dinged, the room exhaled. Pete let out a low whistle and walked into the shop bay, suddenly invested in organizing a pegboard that had been fine for years. Hawk watched him go with mild amusement and then turned back to Jack. Sometimes the circle watches, he said, as if he'd said it before but needed to say it now. Even when you don't see it. Jack blew out a breath that had been stuck in his ribs. You boys just happened to be in the neighborhood. Diesel's mouth did something like a smile. Neighborhood got bigger when you pulled a man out of a fire Mercer. People keep saying that like it's a compliment, Jack said, too tired to sand the edges. It is, Hawk said. It's also a map. Pete reappeared with a clipboard he didn't need. He nodded at Hawk in that careful way small-town men nod at men their wives have warned them about, and then pretended to remember an urgent task across the room. Hawk tipped his head toward the bay. You got a minute? Jack gestured. They walked into the shop, the noise of the compressor a curtain between them and the office. The Pontiac gleamed under the fluorescence. Someone had hung an air freshener shaped like a Christmas tree from the rear view mirror. It smelled like chemical pine and cheap hope. You're seeing cars, Hawk said. Black SUVs. Vans that linger. I'm seeing a lot, Jack admitted. Hawk nodded. Some of those are ours. Some aren't. You don't have to figure out which. You just have to keep doing the next right thing. You get me. I get that you think there's a line between cop trouble and not cop trouble, and I don't want my kid anywhere near either one. Then we're on the same side, Hawk said simply. He reached into his vest and took out a small black rectangle. For a heartbeat, Jack thought it was the cardigan, but this was different. A pager. No, a tiny radio, the old kind, with one button and one purpose. Press and let go if you ever need a voice that isn't 911. Jack looked at the device like it might carry its own gravity. It was ridiculous and comforting at once, like a relic of a world where men listened for each other across static. You expect me to clip that to my belt with my keys? I expect you to put it in the drawer next to your stove, Hawk said, and forget it until you don't. Jack took it. It was heavier than it looked, like most things that matter. There was a long, easy silence. Diesel wandered the bay, admiring and critiquing with the same expression. That lift got a slow leak, he observed. Level's good, Jack said. For now, Diesel said, which was either about hydraulics or everything. Hawk jerked his chin toward the office. You got lunch. Mercer? Does coffee count? Barely. Hawk flicked his eyes toward the diner across the street, the one with a sign that claimed Best Pie in the county, in letters that had lost persuasion decades ago. Come on, Jack hesitated. I can't leave the shop. Pete can. Diesel called from under the Pontiac without looking up. Go on, I'll yell if it falls. They crossed under the high, thin sky. The diner bell did its little nervous laugh. The waitress poured coffee like she had promised someone she'd do it until she couldn't, and then she'd teach someone else how. Hawk didn't take a booth. He took the counter, the stool to the left of Jack, left open a buffer that felt like courtesy. People call him different names, Hawk said after a while, stirring his coffee without adding anything to it. Michael, Lawson, Hawk. Paperwork gets one. Brothers get the other. You hear a name, don't let it decide something for you. It has no business deciding. Jack understood the sermon under the sermon. He nodded. And you call me Mercer because that's the name you stand up to, Hawk said. The other one's the one you lay down with when you wish things were easier. The sentence hit Jack like a weight he could lift. He took a swallow of coffee and didn't flinch at the bitterness. They ate grilled cheese and soup. Hawk cut his sandwich into neat, perfect rectangles, a weird grace in a man whose knuckles bore the history of bad nights. Diesel came in 5 minutes later, grease on his forearm, and ate 2 slices of pie like a man who had stopped pretending food wasn't pleasure. They talked about nothing, which turned out to be everything: supply chains for brake pads, the way this year's winter was coming in colder, whether the old stadium lights at the high school would make it through one more season. The conversation put skin back over nerves. When they stepped back into the afternoon, a wind had come up, pushing leaves across the street like small animals looking for cover. Hawk paused on the curb. "This week," he said, "somebody might try to make a point with you. They don't have the courage to make with me." "Customer with a loud voice," Jack said. "Or a quiet one," Hawk said. "Either way, you don't have to handle it alone." Jack nodded once. "I believe you." Hawk's mouth moved a fraction. "You don't have to. You just have to call." They crossed back. In the bay, Pete had the Pontiac down and was checking torque like a man who wanted every bolt to stay exactly where it belonged. Diesel gave the lift a fond slap. "Still leaking," he said. "You too," Pete replied, surprising himself. By 3, the workday's edges softened. Jack washed his hands in orange grit and watched dark water swirl to clear. He slid the small radio into the top drawer of his desk next to a tape measure, a pocket knife, and Emily's 3rd-grade photo with the gap-toothed grin she hated and he loved. He closed the drawer. He stood in the pickup line with the other tired parents, watched a class of 1st-graders pour like marbles down the front steps. And then there she was, Emily running the bow in her hair, losing the fight, and losing it beautifully. He lifted her. She wrapped around him. For a second, the ledger balanced again. On the way home, a delivery truck drifted in its lane and corrected. A black SUV turned left at the light without stopping at the crosswalk line. The world had edges and also soft places. Jack held both in view the way you're supposed to hold the road, and the rear-view mirror eyes forward, quick checks, full heart. At the house, they did homework and burned grilled cheese and laughed about the smoke alarm's overreaction. After dinner, he fixed the hinge on the cabinet for real and made a note to get a new striker plate. He tucked Emily in, read 2 chapters of the book with the dragon that had anxiety and a very good dog, and turned off the light while she was still smiling. Downstairs, the house hummed and clicked the way old houses do when they're settling and whispering to themselves. Jack opened the drawer and looked at the small radio sitting there like a dare. He closed the drawer again, not because he didn't believe in it, but because he believed in the other thing more: his hands, his people, his address. Outside somewhere, a motorcycle moved through town, not stopping, just passing like a good roomer with nowhere to land. Jack stood at the window and watched the reflection of his own face ghost the glass. He thought of the word circle and how it had felt like a trap the first time he heard it, and how today it felt like a fence you build when the wolves remember your door. He turned away, clicked off the lamp, and let the dark be dark without making it mean something it didn't. Upstairs, his daughter breathed the deep, simple breath of a child who believes the person in the next room can turn rain off by flipping a switch. Downstairs, in a drawer next to a tape measure and a pocket knife, a small radio waited like a last resort that hoped not to be chosen. In between, Jack Mercer took one slow breath, then another, like a man reminding his body it belonged to him. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the sky rinsed and pale, streaked with the last bruises of night. Jack stood on the porch of his small house, coffee steaming in a chipped mug. The world smelled of wet earth diesel from passing trucks, and the faint metallic tang of last night's wreck still stuck in his nostrils. He'd slept only a few hours, restless, replaying the stranger's slurred thanks, the guttural roar of motorcycles in the distance. Inside, Emily stirred awake. He heard her small feet padding across the wooden floorboards and the soft creak of her door. She stepped out, her hair a tousled halo dragging her blanket like a cape. "Dad, you didn't sleep," she said, voice still heavy with dreams. Jack forced a smile and crouched to her height. "I'm fine, kiddo, just thinking." He brushed her hair back. "Want pancakes?" Her eyes brightened. "With blueberries?" "Only the best," he said. They moved into the kitchen together. Jack mixed batter, the sizzle of the skillet filling the silence. Yet behind the ordinary rhythm, his mind kept circling the same questions. Who was that man he'd dragged from the flames? Why had the shadows of bikers lingered silent and watchful just far enough not to be seen? When he dropped Emily off at school later, the playground already humming with laughter. Jack noticed something unusual. Parked across the street was a black Harley-Davidson Chrome glinting in the morning sun. Its rider leaned against a lamppost, heavy jacket studded, arms crossed. He didn't move when Jack's truck pulled away, but Jack's gut tightened. All day at the garage, his nerves hummed like a taut wire. Each time the shop door opened, he half expected leather vests and heavy boots to step through. His coworker, a young mechanic named Luis, noticed. "You good boss?" Luis asked while wiping grease from his hands. "Yeah," Jack said too quickly. "Just tired." But by late afternoon, his unease had grown. When he walked Emily out of the school gates, the Harley was gone. For a moment, he let himself breathe easier. He held her hand tighter on the way to the truck. That night, just as they finished dinner, the rumble returned. It was unmistakable, low-throaty, like thunder rolling over asphalt. Emily's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Jack's eyes met hers. Then came the sound of tires on gravel stopping right outside their house. Jack's body went rigid. He rose slowly, telling Emily in a calm but firm voice, "Stay here. Don't move, okay?" She nodded wide-eyed. When he opened the door, the night air was cool, carrying the acrid smell of exhaust. 3 motorcycles sat at the end of the driveway, their engines idling. On them, 3 men faces shadowed under bandanas and helmets. The one in front killed his engine. The others followed. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the tick of cooling metal. The leader swung a leg over his bike boots, crunching gravel. He pulled off his helmet, revealing weathered skin, a gray beard streaked through like smoke, and eyes hard as flint. "You Jack Carter?" the man asked, voice gravelly. Jack's heart hammered, but he kept his stance firm. "Who's asking?" The man smirked. "Name's Mason. Last night you pulled my brother out of a wreck. You probably don't know who we are." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "We ride with the Hells Angels." Jack felt a chill ripple down his spine. Every cautionary story he'd heard about the club flashed in his mind, violence, loyalty debts repaid in blood. He clenched his fists at his sides. "I just did what anyone would," Jack said evenly. "Didn't matter who he was." Mason's smirk widened into something unreadable. He stepped closer, boots echoing on the driveway. Jack didn't move. From inside, he could feel Emily's eyes watching through the curtain. "You've got guts," Mason said finally. "Most folks wouldn't have touched him. You saved him. That makes you part of our story now." The words hung ominously in the night. Jack's chest tightened. He glanced at the bikes, then back to Mason. "I didn't ask to be part of anything." Mason's stare sharpened, then softened just enough to make it stranger. "Maybe not. But life doesn't ask. It drags you in." He pulled something from his jacket pocket, a patch red and white frayed at the edges. He held it out. Jack didn't take it. "This," Mason said, "is a token of respect. You wear it. People know you did right by us. You refuse it well." He let the sentence trail off, a threat woven into the silence. Behind them, one of the other bikers chuckled darkly. Jack's jaw set. Inside, Emily's shadow flickered on the curtain. His every instinct screamed to keep her safe. He met Mason's eyes and said in a low, steady voice, "Respect isn't forced, and I don't want trouble near my daughter." Mason tilted his head, studying him. Then surprisingly, he laughed, deep rasping like gravel under tires. "Fair enough," he said. He tucked the patch back into his pocket. "But you should know Carter Trouble has a way of finding good men." He turned back toward his bike, the others following. Engines roared to life again, vibrating the ground beneath Jack's feet. As they rode off into the night, taillights glowing like embers fading into the dark, Jack stood rooted to the spot, chest heaving. When he stepped back inside, Emily was waiting, pale and silent. "Dad, who were they?" Jack knelt, wrapping his arms around her. "Just people I helped. That's all you need to know for now." But as he held her staring into the dark beyond his window, he knew it wasn't over. Their visit had been a warning, a mark, and whether he wanted it or not, his life and Emily's was now entangled with the Angels. The night after the Angels' visit stretched on like an endless road. Jack barely slept lying awake with the memory of Mason's gravelly laugh echoing in his ears. Every time headlights swept across the window, his body tensed, expecting the roar of engines to follow. By dawn, the exhaustion had sunk into his bones, but he moved quietly around the kitchen fixing coffee while Emily slept. When she patted in, rubbing her eyes, Jack forced a smile. "Morning, kiddo." "Oatmeal or eggs?" She climbed onto a chair, hugging her knees. "Did those men come back?" Jack paused, the spoon frozen in his hand. "No," he said softly. "And they won't. You don't need to worry." But inside, he wasn't so sure. He knew enough about men like Mason. Once you were on their radar, you didn't just disappear. At the garage, the day passed in fits of normalcy. Cars rolled in, Luis cracked jokes, and country music played faintly from the old radio. Yet every time the bell above the shop door jingled, Jack's stomach clenched. Late afternoon, while changing the oil on an old Ford, he heard it, the same low thunder rolling nearer. He peeked out. Two bikes pulled up, their riders cutting engines in unison. Leather jackets bore the unmistakable red and white patches, Hell's Angels. Luis whistled low. Jack, you know them." Jack wiped his hands on a rag, heart thumping. "Stay inside, Luis. I'll handle this." He stepped out, squinting against the sun. The riders didn't remove their helmets, but one of them held out a folded envelope. From Mason, the taller one said, voice muffled by the visor. Jack took it cautiously, the paper rough beneath his fingers. "What is this?" The rider tilted his head. "A message." "Read it. You'll understand." Then without another word, they kicked their bikes alive and roared away, leaving only the smell of gas and dust behind. Jack unfolded the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in bold, jagged script. "You saved blood. That makes you family. Meet us tomorrow night at the old mill on Route 6. Refuse and you'll regret it." His gut twisted. This wasn't a choice, it was a summons. That evening, Emily sat at the kitchen table doing her homework while Jack read and reread the letter. His hand shook slightly. He didn't want her near this. He didn't want any of it near her. Emily looked up. "Dad?" "You're staring." Jack quickly folded the paper and shoved it into his pocket. "Just thinking about work." But she studied him with those sharp, knowing eyes. "You're lying." The honesty in her voice cut him. He crouched beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. Sometimes grown-ups have problems they don't want kids to worry about. But I promise I'll keep you safe." She nodded slowly, though fear lingered in her gaze. The next night, the sky bruised into dusk as Jack drove out to Route 6. The old mill loomed at the edge of town, rusted and hollow, its windows like dead eyes. A bonfire blazed outside, shadows of bikes circling like wolves. Jack pulled up, engine ticking in the cooling air. He stepped out, squaring his shoulders. Around the fire, at least a dozen men turned to look at him, tattoos, leather eyes gleaming under the firelight. Mason stepped forward, smoke curling from the cigarette in his hand. "Carter, thought you might chicken out." Jack's jaw clenched. "You made sure I couldn't." Mason grinned. "Fair enough, but we're glad you came. Sit, drink. Tonight's about respect." He motioned to a crate of beer nearby. Jack didn't move. "Why am I here?" The laughter from the group was low rolling. Mason tossed his cigarette into the dirt and stepped closer. "Because you proved yourself. You didn't run from fire. You didn't let fear decide. That's rare. We want to know what kind of man you are, and if we can count on you." The fire cracked sparks spiraling into the night. Jack felt their stares pressing against him like the weight of 100 unspoken threats. "I'm just a mechanic," he said firmly. "A dad. That's all I've got." Mason's smile widened, but his eyes hardened. "Then you've got more to lose than most, which means you'll understand this." He snapped his fingers, and one of the men pulled a battered leather vest from a duffel bag, tossing it onto the dirt between them. The Angel's insignia was stitched on the back, blood red and stark. "Put it on," Mason said, "or walk away and watch your life burn." The silence that followed was suffocating. Jack's heart pounded, his mind flashing to Emily asleep in her bed, to the way her hand fit into his when they crossed the street. He stared at the vest, then back at Mason. "I won't wear it," he said, voice low but steady. "You don't own me." For a moment no one moved. Then the laughter came again, colder this time. Mason leaned close, his breath reeking of smoke and whiskey. "You've got fire in you, Carter. I like that, but fire burns hottest before it dies." The men around the fire shifted boots, crunching gravel, hands tightening on bottles and chains. Jack's muscles tensed, every nerve screaming to fight or run. And in that razor-thin moment, Jack realized the truth. Whatever this was, it wasn't about respect. It was about power. And now they would test just how far they could push him. The fire hissed and popped, sending embers into the black sky like tiny sparks of warning. Jack stood, stiff fists clenched at his sides, the angels circling as though waiting for Mason's command. The leather vest still lay in the dirt between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Mason's voice cut through the crackle of flames. "You don't get it, Carter. When we say family, we mean it. We don't offer it to just anyone. You saved blood, and that debt binds you. Walk away from that." He smirked, exhaling smoke in Jack's face. "And you spit on us." Jack didn't flinch. His eyes stayed steady, like weathered steel. "I don't owe you my soul. I did what any decent man would have done." One of the bikers laughed, cruel and sharp. "Decent men don't last long around here." The laughter rippled through the group. A few stepped closer, boots grinding gravel. Jack could feel their heat, the weight of menace pressing against him. But he also felt something else, a calm resolve settling in. He'd faced darker nights, lonelier battles, and always with Emily's safety guiding him. He wasn't about to kneel now. Mason raised a hand and the men froze mid-step. "Easy, boys. Let him speak." He studied Jack for a long, silent moment. "Tell me then, Carter, what's so damn important that you'd rather make enemies than brothers?" Jack's jaw worked, and he let the silence stretch before answering. "My daughter." His voice cut through the smoky air like a blade. "Everything I do is for her. I won't risk her world getting tied to yours." A hush fell. Even the men who'd laughed shifted uneasily, glancing at Mason. There was something about the way Jack said it, solid, unbending, that broke through their bravado. Mason's smirk faltered just for a second. Then he chuckled, shaking his head. "You've got backbone, I'll give you that. But here's the problem. You can't stand outside forever. Once the road finds you, it never lets go." Jack straightened. "Then let it try." The bonfire snapped, and for a moment it seemed like Mason might unleash his men. But instead he flicked his cigarette into the dirt and barked a laugh. "You know what, Carter? You remind me of someone I used to ride with, a stubborn fool who thought he could outrun fate. He didn't. But maybe you've got something different." He turned, motioning to his men. "Leave him." Confusion flickered across their faces. Boss One muttered. "Leave him?" Mason repeated. "For now." The bikers backed off reluctantly, muttering under their breath. Jack's pulse was still racing, but he didn't move until Mason stepped close once more. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "You're walking on a razor, Carter. You don't want the vest, fine. But don't ever think you can wash your hands clean. You're in this story whether you like it or not." With that, Mason turned, straddling his bike. Engines roared to life around him, the thunder of exhaust shaking the ground. They peeled off into the night, leaving the Milliard empty save for the dying fire, and the vest abandoned in the dirt. Jack stood there long after the sound faded, chest heaving. Finally, he picked up the vest, staring at the heavy patchwork of leather and thread. It reeked of oil and smoke of roads he never wanted to walk. He carried it back to his truck, tossed it onto the passenger seat, and drove into the night. At home, Emily was waiting up, despite the hour her small figure curled on the couch. She shot up when he came through the door. "Dad." He knelt, pulling her into a hug so tight she squeaked. "I'm here," he whispered into her hair. "I'm here, Em." She looked at him worried. "You smell like smoke." Jack glanced at the vest still in his hand, then shoved it into the closet out of sight. "Long night," he muttered. For days after, he couldn't shake Mason's words. Customers came and went at the garage. Emily laughed with her friends at school. The world spun like nothing had changed. But Jack knew better. The fire from that night burned inside him, still warning him that this was only the beginning. And sure enough, the storm broke sooner than he expected. One Friday evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Jack was locking up the garage when Louise came running. "Jack, you gotta see this." They stepped outside. Across the street, half a dozen bikes idled, their riders' silent helmets gleaming under the sunset. They didn't move. They didn't shout. They just watched. Luis swallowed. What do they want? Jack's face hardened. They want me to remember. And in that moment, Jack realized Mason hadn't let him go. The Hells Angels were circling closer, not as allies, not yet as enemies, but as a storm waiting to decide whether to destroy him or claim him. The low rumble of engines lingered in the evening air long after the bikes had disappeared down the road. Jack stood frozen outside the garage, the last streaks of daylight stretching across the asphalt like fading warnings. Luis lingered beside him, shifting uneasily from foot to foot. Man, Luis said, his voice barely above a whisper that was creepy. They didn't even say anything. Jack locked the garage door with a sharp twist, jaw tight. They didn't have to. The silence that followed was heavy. Jack could still feel their eyes on him like ghosts refusing to leave. By the time he got home, Emily was already at the kitchen table, crayons scattered around her homework. She looked up, her face brightening instantly. "Dad," she chirped. "You're late again." Jack forced a smile and kissed the top of her head. "Yeah, Em. Got caught up at work." She frowned, studying his face. "You look tired." He sat opposite her, rubbing a hand across his stubbled chin. "Guess I am." He didn't tell her about the bikers. He couldn't. Not yet. Later that night, as Emily slept soundly in her room, Jack stood at the window with the curtain pulled slightly aside. His truck sat in the driveway. Beyond it, the street was quiet. Too quiet. No engines, no laughter, no shadows of leather jackets. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were out there watching. Days bled into weeks, but the Angels never really left. Sometimes it was a pair of headlights idling too long across the street. Other times it was a gloved hand leaving an unmarked envelope under his shop door. Inside were photographs, grainy but unmistakable, of him and Emily at the diner, at the park, even at her school. Jack's gut twisted each time. This wasn't a threat written in bold letters. This was worse. It was a reminder: we see you. We can touch your world anytime we want. Luis noticed the shift in Jack before anyone else. One slow Tuesday afternoon, as the two of them changed out an old Ford's brake pads, Luis wiped his hands on a rag and studied him. "You're a different man. You keep looking over your shoulder. What's going on?" Jack slammed the hood shut harder than he meant to. "Nothing you need to worry about." Luis didn't buy it. "Nothing." "Huh? Then why were there 4 bikes parked across the street last night? Why do I feel like every time I leave this place someone's watching?" Jack exhaled heavily, leaning against the car. "Because they are." Luis froze. "Who Hell's Angels?" The words came out flat, final. Luis blinked, then let out a humorless laugh. "You're kidding." Jack shook his head slowly. "I wish I was." Luis ran a hand down his face. "Jesus, Jack, why would they come after you?" Jack's eyes grew distant. "Because I pulled a man out of a wreck. Because I saved him. And that man wasn't just anyone, he was one of theirs." Luis stared at him like he'd grown another head. "And now they... What, think you're part of their family?" Jack nodded grimly. "Or they want me to be. But either way, they're not letting go." The garage grew quiet. Only the faint hum of traffic outside broke the silence. Luis finally muttered, "So what the hell are you gonna do?" Jack didn't answer right away. He thought of Emily, her crayons scattered on the table, her innocent laugh. He thought of Mason's words by the bonfire. "You're in this story whether you like it or not. I'm going to protect my daughter," Jack said finally. His tone was firm, but deep down he knew protection wouldn't come easy. The next escalation came on a rainy Thursday night. Jack and Emily had just finished dinner when a knock rattled the front door. Jack's stomach dropped. It wasn't the knock of a neighbor. It was heavy, deliberate. "Stay here," Jack told Emily, his voice low. He opened the door to find a biker standing on the porch, leather dripping from the rain helmet tucked under his arm. His face was young, but his eyes carried the weight of old battles. "You, Carter?" he asked. Jack nodded slowly. The man reached into his jacket, and Jack's muscles tensed, ready for a fight. But instead of a weapon, the biker pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it over. "From Mason." Without another word, he turned and walked back to his bike engine, roaring as he disappeared into the storm. Jack unfolded the paper with shaking hands. The words inside were written in a bold scrawl. Meeting, Friday night. You know where. Don't bring anyone. Jack crumpled the note in his fist, heart pounding. Emily peeked around the corner, her small voice timid. Dad. Who was it? Jack forced a smile, hiding the paper behind his back. Just someone lost in the rain, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about. But inside he knew it was a lie. He wasn't just being invited anymore. He was being summoned. The rain came down harder the following night, slashing against the windshield as Jack drove toward the meeting spot. The wipers beat a frantic rhythm, but his heart thudded faster still. He hadn't told Luis where he was going. He hadn't dared. Emily was safe at home with their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Conway, but he hated leaving her behind. Every mile he drove felt like a gamble, a bet against fate he couldn't afford to lose. The paper had said, "You know where." And Jack did. The clearing near the abandoned rail yard where the bonfire had once burned and the angels had stood in a circle of flames. It wasn't just a meeting ground, it was a test. When he pulled in, headlights swept across rows of chrome. The angels were already there, their bikes lined like an army at rest. Figures loomed in the rain, leather glistening faces shadowed beneath dripping hoods and helmets. Mason stood at the center umbrella, tilted back arms, crossed like a general surveying his troops. Jack killed the engine but didn't move right away. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight the leather groaned. Then he exhaled, shoved the door open, and stepped out into the storm. Carter Mason greeted his voice carrying even through the rain. Right on time. Jack walked toward him, rain soaking through his jacket in seconds. You summoned me, he said flatly. Mason smirked. We invited you before. This time was less polite. Consider it progress. Around them, the bikers chuckled low. Jack felt every eye burn into him. He swallowed hard. What do you want? Mason's grin widened. What do we always want? Loyalty, brotherhood, and men who prove they're worth standing next to. I'm not one of you, Jack shot back. I never asked to be. Mason's gaze sharpened. You pulled Tommy out of that wreck when no one else would. You dragged him from the jaws of fire and stayed until the ambulance came. That wasn't just luck, Carter. That was courage. And courage like that we don't ignore. Jack's jaw clenched. I did it because he was human, not because of the patch on his back. The crowd murmured restless, but Mason raised a hand to quiet them. And that's what makes you different. You did it without expecting anything in return. But we don't let debts hang in the air. Mason stepped closer, so close Jack could smell the mix of rain smoke and gasoline clinging to his jacket. You saved one of ours. Now, whether you like it or not, you've got family. Jack shook his head. Family, I have a daughter. She's all the family I need. The murmur turned into growls, the crowd shifting. One man spat in the mud. Another cracked his knuckles. Mason, though, only tilted his head, studying Jack like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. You think you can just walk away? Mason asked quietly. That by saying no, you close the door. He leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper only Jack could hear. The thing about family is, it follows you, it protects you, it tests you. Jack stiffened. And if I don't pass your test, Mason's smile turned cold. Then you'll wish you had. The bikers erupted with laughter, but it wasn't friendly. It was sharp, jagged, meant to slice at his resolve. Jack took a step back, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. I'm not afraid of you. Mason chuckled low. You should be. But fear isn't what binds us. Fear breaks. Brotherhood holds. He snapped his fingers and two men stepped forward from the shadows. Between them, they dragged a battered duffel bag. With a grunt, they dropped it at Jack's feet. It landed with a wet thud, mud splattering across his boots. Open it, Mason ordered. Jack hesitated, then crouched down. The zipper rasped, and inside he saw stacks of cash, more money than he'd seen in years. His stomach turned. What is this? Mason spread his arms. A gift, a gesture. Call it appreciation. Jack slammed the bag shut. I don't want your money. The laughter stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the hiss of the rain. Mason's expression darkened. You think this is about choice? He asked softly. You already made your choice when you pulled Tommy from that wreck. You're tied to us now. The money. That's not payment. That's a symbol. You take it, you're in. You refuse. He trailed off, but the weight of the unspoken threat pressed harder than the storm itself. Jack stood, fists clenched. I don't need your money, and I sure as hell don't need your brotherhood. Mason studied him for a long moment, then slowly smiled. Good. I was hoping you'd say that, because now we'll see what you're really made of. He snapped his fingers again. The circle of bikers closed in around Jack Boots, crunching in the mud engines, revving in the distance like a war drum. Jack's pulse hammered in his ears, but he stood his ground. He thought of Emily's face, her laughter, her crayons scattered across the table. He thought of why he fought in the first place, not for money, not for power, but for love. Mason leaned close, his words slicing through the rain. You don't walk away from us, Carter. You either stand with us, or you're crushed under us. The bikers closed the circle tighter, and Jack knew this night wasn't just a meeting. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. They closed the circle until Jack could feel the heat of their bodies and the gasoline breath of their engines. Rain stitched the dark and silver lines beating on leather running down Jack Mercer's neck beneath his collar. He kept his feet planted in the sucking mud and set his jaw the way he had the day Emily was born, like a hinge that wouldn't give. Mason stood 3 feet away, the bonfire casting his grin in orange and shadow. Last chance, he said over the hiss and drum of the weather. Put on the vest or learn how fast a small life burns. The men laughed low, the sound of a bar door slamming behind a bad idea. A chain slid through one man's fist with the whisper of a threat that didn't need explaining. Jack's pulse thudded in his ears. He thought of Emily's handwriting on the refrigerator note about Saturday's art show, of the gap in her smile, where the front tooth used to be, of the way she squeezed his fingers twice at crosswalks, one for I'm here, one for I know. He took one breath, then another. I'm not wearing your colors, he said, voice level. And you don't touch my family. A new sound cut through the rain, a single engine coming in hot, but not loud. The circle twitched. Heads turned. The bike slid into the clearing like a punctuation mark, black and patient. The rider kicked down a boot, killed the engine, and pulled off his helmet slow. Even in the storm, the scar along his hairline looked like a thread from some old bad story. Reed Lawson Hawk took in the tableau with washed-out blue eyes that missed nothing. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Hold. The circle obeyed. Mason's grin soured. You're late. Hawk's gaze flicked once to him, then back to Jack. I'm right on time. Mason took a step forward, jaw cocked. We were finishing business. Looked like you were about to start a mistake, Hawk said, calm as a closed door. He moved into the circle without shouldering anyone aside, and somehow the circle made room. Water dripped off the peak of his helmet onto his vest, darkening the leather like the spreading of a thought. Hawk turned to Jack. Where's your girl? With the neighbor, Jack said. Mrs. Conway. She makes casseroles when she's worried. Hawk's mouth made a shape that wasn't quite a smile, wasn't quite not. Smart woman. He looked past Jack at Mason. You think I called this man out here to beat him into a jacket? Mason's laugh had brick in it. He thinks he can stand outside and stay clean. Time he learned how the road works. The road works the way we make it work, Hawk said, and there was iron in the quiet. We ain't a dog looking for somebody to kick. A couple of the men shifted, not quite sure whether to look at the fire or the ground or their boots. Mason spread his hands magnanimous like a bad saint. Then you tell him. Because I did, and all I got was Sunday school answers. Hawk didn't look away from Jack. Ride! Jack's heart knocked once against his ribs like a hand on a locked door. Where? Someplace you'll understand more than this, Hawk said, tipping his chin toward the fire and the ring and the rain. You want to know what this is? He pointed at the duffel Mason had made him open, the cash glowering inside like a dare. It ain't that, Mason scoffed. What is it then, Lawson's story? Time. Proof, Hawk said. Get the hell off my clearing. The order wasn't barked. It was laid down like a plank. And still the men moved boots, scuffing shoulders, turning engines, coughing to life in surrender. Mason lingered a breath too long, his smile thin as a blade. This gonna be on you, he said to Hawk. When the bill comes due. It's already due, Hawk said without heat. You just didn't read the fine print. He swung a leg over the bike. Mercer behind me. Jack looked at the fire once more, at the vest heavy with rain, and threat lying like a dead thing in the mud. He left it where it was swung onto the Harley and grabbed the bar behind the seat. The engine vibrated into his bones, and then they were out of the clearing, the last of the circle's glow disappearing in the mirrors, the rain turning from needles to a fine mist as they ate up blacktop. They didn't ride fast. They rode in a steady thinking lope like a man telling a story to himself. Jack's breath found a rhythm with the engine. Pine and wet dirt and diesel and the faint tang of river water braided the air. Town unrolled shuttered storefronts, the laundromat blinking open like a tired promise, the diner with 3 cars out front and a waitress looking out between refills. Hawk turned left without signaling, then right into the lot of the Sunshine Market. The grocery that did a brisk trade in cigarettes, milk, and lottery dreams at 9 at night. Headlights. 2 men in rain-slick hoodies had a 60-year-old cashier pinned to the curb with words like knives. "You scraped our F car," one hissed. "Look at it. You blind." "You're paying for that." The cashier, Mrs. Hadley, who slipped Emily extra lollipops when Jack wasn't looking, held both palms up. "I didn't touch your car, gentlemen. I'd be happy to look at the footage. My Hawk didn't enter the scene like a savior." He parked, shut his engine off, and let the silence of his presence arrive before the sound of his boots did. Jack climbed off with the slow burn of adrenaline making his hands steady. The first man clocked Hawk's vest, then Jack's flannel, then the night itself recalculated. "We don't want trouble." "You brought it," Jack said from 3 paces away. His voice surprised him. It wasn't loud, but it carried. "Take a breath. Step back." "Who the hell are you?" The second man spat, even as his feet betrayed him with a half-step of retreat. "Someone who fixes things," Jack said, "like paying for real damages if there are any, or calling the cops if there aren't." He didn't look at Hawk. He didn't have to. He could feel the man like a wall behind him, not closing him in, just keeping weather off. The first man's gaze snagged on Hawk's patch again and went brittle. "We ain't dealing with—" "You're dealing with her?" Hawk said, as if the thought bored him. He nodded at Mrs. Hadley. "And with him because he's the one talking about receipts instead of blood." He jerked his chin toward Jack's truck. "You got a flashlight in there, Mercer?" Jack tossed him one from the bed. Hawk handed it back as if the test were clear and already passed. Jack crouched in the drizzle and ran the beam slow along the fender of the men's car, a late-model sedan with more attitude than upkeep. He found no scrape that matched the story, no fresh paint, just the scuffs that come from a life lived parking by feel. He stood and dusted his palms like he could clap the lie off them. "Nothing," he said. "Apologize and go." The second man bristled. "You talking to me?" He took 1 step into Jack's space and ran into something invisible, the part of a man that doesn't move back anymore. His breath hit Jack's cheek and smelled like cheap whiskey and bad decisions. "You're trespassing on a promise," Jack said, soft as a fuse, the kind where decent people can buy milk at night without being shaken down. The man shoved him. Jack didn't swing. He didn't need to. Tires whispered and then growled at the edge of the lot. 1 engine, then 3, then 5. Headlights poured into the scene like day arriving sideways. Bikes idled behind Hawk in a half-moon diesel first shoulders like a guardrail. Cutter with his quiet accountant's eyes that saw more than numbers. Snakes scowling at the weather and everything in it. No one got off their bikes. No one said a word. The 2 men looked at the line of machines, at the men on them, at the small grocery with its flickering open sign, and at Jack standing without his hands up. They did the math badly, and then well. "We were just leaving," the first said. He took the other's sleeve without waiting for permission. "Come on, man." They went. No one followed. No one cheered. The lot exhaled. Mrs. Hadley's hands shook when she smoothed her apron. "I don't know who you are," she told Hawk. "Good," Hawk said. "You don't need to." Her eyes slid to Jack and filled with a gratitude that embarrassed them both. "But I know who he is." She reached behind the counter, came up with a brown paper sack already fat with grocery things. "This found its way to your porch last week," she said like a confession. "Sometimes the good goes in circles." Jack's throat pinched. He looked at Hawk, who looked at the rain, which looked back indifferent. Diesel killed his engine, swung off, and lifted a crate from his bike like it weighed nothing. He set it inside the door. "For the food drive," he said. Mrs. Hadley blinked. "I didn't—" "You did?" Diesel said and walked back into the weather. Snake rolled past Jack, slow as a thought. Next time he grunted, not quite looking at him, call before you get pushed. Jack touched the pocket where the small radio waited at home in a drawer. Didn't need to. Snake made a noise that might have been approval if you tilted your head and listened for it. Hawk turned to Jack. Rain softened to a fine, almost pleasant wet. The lot hummed with the low animal purr of idling Harleys and the fluorescent buzz of a sign that meant we keep this place lit. This is the circle, Hawk said like a simple answer to a long exam. Not the patch. Not the bonfire. This. Showing up because it matters. Jack looked at Mrs. Hadley's small hands tucking the sack's top closed with the concentration of someone tying a bow at a grave. He looked at the bikes, at the way their riders faced out, watching lines nobody else saw. He looked at his own hands and saw them both grease and blood, and found he didn't hate either as much as he had when the night began. What happens when Mason decides to make his point anyway? Jack asked, not because he didn't know, but because saying it changes the air. Hawk blew rain from his lip. He'll try. He nodded to the line of bikes backing into a V like they were spelling something with chrome. And we'll try harder. They rode. Not far. A loop through the side streets that needed reminding who lived here, then past the elementary school, where Emily drew dragons that apologized too much. The engine said nothing loud and still said everything. A porch light clicked on. A curtain fell back into place. A small boy in superhero pajamas stood at his front window and raised a fist to the night like a secret handshake you're allowed to keep. Hawk peeled off at the corner where the town turned into trees. Jack's truck waited where he'd left it, water ticking off its hood. Hawk killed the engine and sat a moment before swinging off. You don't owe me, he said. I know, Jack said. You don't owe him. Hawk added meaning. Mason, without saying it. I know that too, Jack said. But you owe her. Hawk tipped his chin toward a point in space where Emily's room would be if you drew a line across town. Always, Jack said. Then, this is simple, Hawk said, as if anything ever was. Call when it's not. Jack nodded. You gonna tell your boys to quit parking across my street like wolves? They're not wolves, Hawk said. They're dogs that used to have bad owners. Jack snorted despite himself. Teach 'em to sit. Working on it, Hawk said. The bikes rolled away into the soft rain, not a retreat, not a parade, just a going that would circle back when needed. Jack drove home with the heater on full and his hand steady on the wheel. Mrs. Conway's lamp glowed in her front window. Through his own screen door, he could see the casserole she'd left on his stove steam, fogging the lid. Emily was asleep, starfish spread across her bed, hair damp from the bath. The bear a dark comma under her chin. Jack leaned on the doorframe and listened to her breathe until his heart slowed to match. In the kitchen, he opened the drawer and looked at the small radio sitting there like a promise you tell yourself you won't use. He closed the drawer gently and rinsed rain from his hair in the sink. On the porch, a paper sack waited he hadn't noticed before, bread milk oranges and a note in block letters. Keep the circle going. No signature. He smiled, a tired thing that felt like a sunrise cut to size. He turned off the last light and let the house hold him up. Outside, the road was just a road again. Inside, a father stood watch over a sleeping child and tried to feed a new space in his chest with decent things, work. Courage men who showed up and didn't ask for applause. Tomorrow would bring its next lesson. Tonight had already said enough. The diner had emptied by nightfall, leaving only the buzz of a neon sign and the smell of fried onions that lingered in the booths. Jack sat across from Cole, the older biker, leaning on his elbows, face shadowed under the dim lamp above their table. Emily slept curled up in the corner booth, her little jacket bundled under her head. Outside, the roar of bikes moving down the highway occasionally cut through the quiet, a reminder that the world beyond those windows was still in motion. Cole sipped his black coffee and finally broke the silence. You're not cut from the same cloth as the rest of us, Jack. That's plain as day. But you saved a brother without asking who he was. That counts for something in our world. Jack gave a half shrug. I didn't know he was one of yours. I just saw a man bleeding in the wreck. I couldn't leave him there. His voice was rough, low-tired from everything the last weeks had thrown at him. Cole's lips tugged into the faintest grin. That's what makes it matter. You acted on instinct. You pulled him out knowing it could have gone wrong, and now here we are. Sometimes men don't choose family. Family chooses them. Jack looked out the window, the neon glow painting streaks of red and green across the glass. He thought of Emily asleep just a few feet away, thought of how many nights he'd sat alone at their kitchen table wondering if anyone in the world really had his back. Family, huh? Jack muttered. Last time I tried believing in that, my wife walked out on me. My little girl's all I got. Cole leaned closer, lowering his voice. And you'll keep her safe. But don't mistake pride for strength. No man wins every fight alone. You want to keep her from the wolves out there, you'll need allies. You think being a single dad makes you weak, but to us it makes you dangerous. Because every choice you make, it ain't about you, it's about her. That kind of man doesn't break easy. Jack studied him for a long moment, hearing the hum of the light, the soft whistle of wind under the door. He didn't answer right away because he knew Cole was right. Every day, every mile, every sacrifice had been for Emily. Then Cole leaned back and tossed a few bills on the table for the waitress. Come with us tomorrow. The Angels are meeting down at the quarry outside of town. You don't have to wear a patch. Just show your face. Let them see the man who dragged Mason out of fire when the world wrote him off. Jack stiffened. And if I say no, Cole's gaze hardened. Then you walk away and the club owes you a debt we'll never get to repay. But debts have a way of haunting men. Sometimes it's better to square things clean while the chance is there. Jack exhaled slowly, his eyes dropping to Emily's sleeping form. She's my world, Cole. If I walk into that pit, I need to know no one touches her. No one. Cole's tone turned almost reverent. On my colors, Jack. No one lays a hand on your girl. She'll be safer under our roof than she's ever been. That's my word. The following day, Jack found himself standing at the lip of the quarry, red dust curling around his boots as dozens of bikes circled below their engines, echoing off the rock walls. The rumble was like a storm building underground, the kind that could break a man's will before the first word was spoken. Emily clung to his hand, wide-eyed at the sight. Men in leather vests and women with tattoos up their arms lined the edges, some lifting bottles, some glaring at the newcomer in their midst. It was a world Jack had only seen from the outside, and now he was in the middle of it with nowhere to run. Cole put a hand on his shoulder. Remember, don't speak unless spoken to. Stand tall. They'll test you, but don't let them smell fear. The leader, broad shoulders, beard streaked with gray, stepped forward. His voice carried like gravel down the stone walls. So this is the single dad I've been hearing about, the one who yanked Mason out of hell. His eyes narrowed on Jack, then flicked to Emily. And this must be the girl you'd burn the world down for. Jack's jaw tightened, his grip firm around Emily's tiny hand. That's right, she's my daughter, and I'd do it again. The men around them murmured, some nodding, others sneering. The leader smirked. You don't belong here, but you've done what most men wouldn't. You saved one of ours not knowing he carried our patch. That puts you in a strange place. The question is, are you brave enough to stand with us when the fire spreads, or will you run back to your quiet life and pretend you never touched this world? Jack met his stare. His heartbeat pounded in his chest, but his voice came steady. I don't pretend. I don't run. I take care of my own. That's all I've ever done. That's all I'll keep doing. A hush fell. Then one of the bikers laughed, a rough sound that echoed off the quarry walls. The leader's smirk spread into something sharper, more dangerous. We'll see, Jack. We'll see if you're as unbreakable as you think. The engines roared louder, dust rising into the air like smoke from a battlefield. Jack pulled Emily a little closer, his eyes never leaving the leader's. For the first time, he felt the weight of what he had stepped into, not just a debt, not just a favor. This was the start of a war he hadn't chosen. And yet somewhere deep in his chest, he knew this was the moment his life had been pushing him toward all along. The quarry was alive with the thunder of engines, the kind of sound that didn't just rattle the air, but shook straight through bone. Emily pressed against Jack's side, her small hand clutching his jacket sleeve so tight it cut off the blood in his arm. Jack stood in the dust, every nerve on fire, refusing to flinch beneath the gaze of 100 men who lived by a code as unforgiving as the desert itself. The leader, a man they called Hawk, circled slowly, boots crunching gravel. His presence commanded the crowd like a storm on the horizon, inevitable, unstoppable. Hawk's eyes stayed fixed on Jack. A single dad raising a girl on his own, he said, voice low but carrying. Most men fold under that weight. But you pulled Mason from a wreck and didn't think twice. Tell me, was it courage or stupidity? Jack's jaw worked, but his words came steady. Doesn't matter. A man was dying. I couldn't walk away. That answer stirred something in the crowd, murmurs, nods, even a few shouts. Hawk's lips tugged into a crooked grin. Straight talk. I like that. But words don't weigh as much as action. He snapped his fingers. Two bikers rolled forward with an old stripped-down motorcycle, its frame blackened from some past fire, handlebars bent like broken arms. They pushed it into the circle and let it clatter down the echo, bouncing off the quarry walls. You want our respect? You ride this heap down the incline across the pit and back up the other side. If you make it without eating gravel, you and your little girl walk out of here with protection. If not, Hawk's eyes flicked to Emily, then back to Jack. Well, the road doesn't forgive mistakes. Jack felt his pulse hammering in his temples. He glanced at the wreck of a bike, then at Emily. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with something fierce. Daddy, she whispered, her voice trembling. You don't have to. He crouched to meet her eyes, brushing dust from her cheek with his thumb. Baby, sometimes you don't get to choose the fight. Sometimes the fight chooses you. I'll come back to you. You hear me? She nodded, but her lip quivered. Jack kissed her forehead, then stood tall. I'll ride. The quarry erupted, some cheering, others jeering. Cole's voice cut through the noise. Jack, think it through. Those brakes are shot. The frame's warped. One wrong move. But Jack was already straddling the machine, gripping the warped handlebars like a man taking hold of fate itself. He didn't know much about bikes, not compared to the men who lived in the saddle, but he knew about balance, about keeping his head steady when the world was spinning out of control. Hawk raised his hand and the roar of the crowd fell to silence. Let's see what the single dad is made of. The bike coughed to life under Jack's boot, rattling like it might die before it moved an inch. He aimed it toward the slope, heart in his throat. The incline was steep, loose gravel, and dust threatening to swallow the tires whole. Jack gritted his teeth and gunned the throttle. The machine lurched forward, bouncing and skidding as it barreled down. The quarry floor rose to meet him in a storm of dust. His hands burned from gripping the bent bars, his body swayed with every jerk and slide. Voices shouted above, echoing, but Jack's world narrowed to the bike beneath him and the promise he'd made his daughter. He hit the pit floor hard, the jolt rattling his spine, but he held on. The bike fishtailed, almost throwing him, but Jack shifted his weight, grinding the machine forward, inch by inch across the dusty basin. The incline on the far side loomed like a wall. Jack could feel the bike's weakness, the engine sputtering, the frame fighting him with every turn. He leaned low, coaxing every ounce of strength from the battered machine, whispering through gritted teeth. Come on, just a little more, just one more push. Emily's scream carried across the quarry. Daddy Jack jammed the throttle and felt the bike surge, clawing its way up the incline. Tires spat gravel like gunfire. For one terrifying second, the machine lost grip and slid backward. The crowd roared, some in laughter, others in awe. Jack's teeth bared muscles, screaming as he forced the wreck forward. The front wheel crested the lip, then the back. He shot onto level ground, the bike coughing one last time before dying beneath him. Jack staggered off, chest heaving, sweat mixing with dust on his face. For a moment, silence hung. Then the quarry erupted. Some shouted his name, others beat fists against leather, and Emily broke free from Cole's hand to throw herself into her father's arms. Jack caught her, lifting her against his chest, his body trembling from adrenaline and relief. Hawk's grin spread wide, wolfish but approving. Well, I'll be damned. The single dad made it. He raised his hand and the noise cut like a blade. From this day on, Jack and his girl walk under our shadow. Nobody touches them without answering to me. That's the law. The angels roared, their approval engines firing to punctuate the vow. Cole clapped Jack's shoulder hard enough to nearly drop him. Told you, brother, you've got iron in you. Jack met Hawk's eyes across the pit. He saw danger there, but respect too. Maybe even something like kinship. He whispered to Emily, holding her close. It's over, baby. We're safe now. But in the pit of his stomach, Jack knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you. We listen to you. And we are honored to tell these stories for you.